Okay, so we're going to do a little demo of how controllers end up interacting with factories. And what we're sort of shooting for is, again, we'll do another Northwind example. You can't get tired of this stuff. And we'll have two different controllers that we're looking at. We'll have a products controller and we'll have a cart controller. And the only reason that they're going to be related to each other is they're both going to end up using the same factory, which is a cart factory. Um, and in fact, we're actually going to have two different factories. We'll have a factory to get our products, and we'll have a factory to get our cart. And some sort of logic that we'll have here is that you can only delete something from your cart if you end up having it in your cart. We're also going to want to total up the amount in your cart, and we're going to have another area on the page. We're going to specify how many items you have in your cart. So again, if these were the prices, it would be 2 fizzes and 2 buzzes, and that would be a total of 4 items that we have in our cart. So without even actually creating an application, you can actually do something like this directly on JSBin. We're going to add a couple of libraries in here. So here's going to be Bootstrap I'm going to bring in here, and I'm going to bring in Angular 1.4 version, and just to sort of get things wired up a little bit, let's actually add in some Bootstrap classes. We'll add a row here. And let's actually add 2 columns. So this is going to be column. Let's make this small 6. And this will be products. And let's kind of replicate this. And this is going to be our cart. So let's actually put this will look a little bit better if we put it inside of div class container. So it'll just give us a little margin here, which will look a little bit better. Let's format this a little bit nicer. Okay, so you could actually even see that this is going to be responsive. If I go over here, you should see that this will show up on the other side. So the first thing that I want to do here is actually set up my products controller. And so I'm going to go over here, and I'm just going to wrap this entire div into a products control. So I'll say ng controller, products control. And again, right off the bat, if I was to go and keep my console open here and run this, nothing's really going to happen because, in fact, it doesn't even know that I have an Angular app. But if I was to go over here and say app equals Angular module app, give it no dependencies here, but this is how my app gets created. And let me just do console.clear over here just to make sure I'm seeing this error. So no errors here at the moment, but the second that I go in here and on my body put in ng app equals app, I'll get an error that it doesn't know what products control is. So let me say that my app is going to have a controller called products control. Now this is something that I mentioned before, and this is pretty important here. So this will end up passing here. I want it to go in here and say scope.foo equals bar. Just as sort of a sanity check here. If I went over here and put in foo, I should see, and again, my problem is here is that, again, I mentioned this before, that if you try to do dependency injection, and here in case, I have a different issue, right? So in my case here is I don't end up having a scope. So if I put that scope in, that goes away. I see that bar shows up here. But the thing that I want to point out to you is that if for some reason I had 2 of these controllers, okay? And just to sort of prove a point, if I say console.log creating controller, okay, you'll see that this will end up getting registered twice. So in fact, this function will get called twice. I'll have this controller. I'll have 2 different scopes for this controller. And again, they're going to function the same way, but they're really 2 different objects. So I don't want that, but I just want to show you that this will get called every time that you instantiate a controller. So let's say that we expect to have some products factory. And in fact, what we want to have with our products factory is that we want our products factory to be able to return to us a collection of products. So we can sort of think about how this would end up getting set up. This could be a pretty simplistic factory. Now again, this is what I mentioned before, is that if it doesn't find a products factory, you get this error. And also pretty important here, I want to show you, is that if I could make this error go away by saying factory products, and if I just return even an empty object, that error will end up going away. I just want to point something out to you. This order doesn't matter, okay? Because again, Angular is not going to start unless everything is loaded, all the factories, all the controllers are defined. So this order doesn't really make much of a difference here. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to return a method. I want my products factory to get products. Now I'll get an error here because the get products function doesn't give anything here, is not defined. I could put it even below here. And the reason why that works is that, we have hoisting of functions, which will end up hoisting this function actually up to the top. So even though the return is here, we can define it here. And I'm going to do a little copying and pasting here to make this a little bit easier to get some data here. But I'm going to go and actually create a couple of products. So bear with me 1 second here. And we'll get some products in here that we could then end up displaying. So not going to be terribly exciting here. We'll have 3 products that we'll put inside a variable. Notice, by the way, that I can't define this. Variables don't end up getting hoisted. So I can't define this below my return, but functions I can. And what I'm going to do here is when I ask for my products, I'm just going to return these products. So that's enough for us to sort of get started here. What I'm going to do within my controller is I'm going to say scope.products equals products get products. And if I wanted to just do a sanity check here, I could go in here and put in products, and I would see my products. I don't want them displayed like that. I want to display them as a list group. So let me actually move a couple of these things over, so I've got a little more room to work here. Keep on moving these back and forth. So this is going to be class of list group. And I'll say list item, ng repeat. And this is going to be product in products. And here I could just output product.name. And since I want this to show a little bit nicer, this is going to be a list group. This is going to be a class of list group item. Okay. So the other thing that I want to do is I want to display the price here. So I'm going to put this in a div, and I'm going to put this in a class called pull right, which will float this to the right. And I'll put in product.price. Now, one of the things that we could do here is we want to show this as currency. We haven't done this yet, but we will. Angular gives us the ability to create a filter, which we've done this actually in Swig. It's similar. We could actually show this over here on the right. And let's actually put this in a link. And I'm going to say ng click. And this is going to be add product. This doesn't exist yet, but we are going to put this in. So we're going to end up adding a product. And this is going to be a link. So if, again, we just sort of want to do a little sanity check here, we could go over here and in our controller, we could say scope dot add product, and this is going to be a function. And here we could just see the product print out here. We'll say console.log product. Okay, so we see that we actually have a list, sort of the starting point for this. Just to do one other thing here, we're also going to want to put in a button with a class of btn, let's say btn warning. And I'm just going to put an X in here. This is going to be to remove a product. Notice how this is actually shifting down more than it should. So one of the things that I can do is when I pull right, I actually have a float. There's probably any number of ways to do this, but I'm going to actually just say style equals clear both. To sort of avoid that, I'm sure there's a bootstrap class that I could use as well. This hasn't been wired up yet, but what this is going to have here, once we end up adding it, I'm going to have an ng click, and this is going to be remove product. And again, just to sort of get the ball rolling on this, we could copy this. And this will be remove product. So we've got our methods here. They don't really do anything right now. This will just show the products, but we're going to actually find a way to add and remove them from a cart. So right now, what we have is we just have these products. The next thing that we're going to do is actually we're going to create a factory that's going to give us the functionality of a cart to be able to actually add specific products to a cart. So right now, we've got a factory to get our products. Again, if this was making a call to the back end, this would end up using the $HTTP object. We've got a controller that's utilizing it, and we can end up using dependency injection in order to get it. So what we want to accomplish here, and again, we don't have this ability to do this, but we want to be able to say something like cart.add product, or in this case, cart.remove product. This doesn't exist. I won't get an error yet, but if I was to go and do this, I would get this error because cart is not defined. On the same token, if I said, well, I'm going to inject a cart here, and let's actually close that down a little bit over here, give ourselves a little bit more room to work. So if I was to go over here and inject a cart itself, which doesn't exist yet, this would give me this injection error. And I'm going to go down here, and I'm actually going to create my cart. So here's my cart. Now again, the thing here is that this is only going to end up getting called one time. These are really singleton objects that we have here. Let's just see what I'm missing. So here's my cart with my factory. App.factory. And the reason why this happens is that you can't just, this is going to end up getting called. I've got to return something. So even if I just return this empty object, that's fine. But what I want to be able to do is to have the ability to store things in this cart. So this function will only get called once, but that doesn't prevent me from using closure in here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up an items property. And so I'm going to keep track of the items that are in my cart. My goal here is to sort of group the items in my cart. So again, I'm going to assume that my cart items have, each of my products has a unique name. And so I'm going to start setting up my methods here. So I'm going to have a method called add. And maybe to make this a little bit more readable here, I'm going to say add is going to be add, remove is going to be remove. And what I'll do here is that when I want to go and add something to my cart, I'm going to be adding a product, and I'm just going to ask the question. I'll say item equals items product.name. So if I look at my items and I'm going to pass in a product here, can I find that item? This would be the equivalent of a line item. Let's call it line item. And I'll say, hey, look, if you can't find it, if you don't have a line item, I'll say line item equals items product name. And this is going to be an object, and I want to keep track of my product. So I'll say product, quantity, and I'll start out with a quantity of 0. So in which case I will have a line item in my cart, and if in fact I have a line item in my cart, now I'll say, hey, look, line item, your quantity, every time that I add you, your quantity is going to be increased by 1. So that's going to happen every time that I add you to the cart. When I go to remove you, it's actually a little bit easier. When I go to remove something from the cart, I'm simply going to take the items and I'm going to delete from the items the product's name. And at least, in fact, I should be able to add things here. I'm not going to end up seeing anything. But if I was to go over here, and let's actually add something so we could see that this is functioning the way we think it's functioning. So here's our products control. So what we can do here is that we could continue with this. And what we could end up doing is something like this. So if we ended up going to our products control, we could say something like scope.cart equals cart.items. And let's just go to our cart and actually specify that not only does it have we could actually add this items collection here by just saying items. So now we've got this cart, cart.items, and I'm just putting this here very temporarily to go over here. And let's see, right below all of our products, we'll put in, actually, one more, we'll go below our list, our unordered list, and I'm going to go in here and put in cart. Okay? So right now you can see that this is empty. If I go in here, here's foo, quantity of 1, and it'll increase. And if I go to remove it, I'll see that I don't have anything in the cart. But I could add multiple things, and I could remove them. Let's just do a little bit of housekeeping here, so that when I end up, and again, now that I know that that works, I'm going to take this out. I'm not actually going to display my cart here. But let's actually just put a little bit of logic in here so that when we end up going to remove something from our cart, let's actually only show this button. We'll say ng show, and we'll say, hey, look, has product. How do we know that you end up having a product? So what we'll do here, we'll say scope has product. We're going to want this to return a true or false value. So the responsibility of determining whether or not the cart has the product, let's actually put this on the cart itself. So we'll say, hey, cart has product. Again, that doesn't exist. That's going to end up throwing an exception. And I'm going to get rid of the items here because I actually really don't have a need to expose it. But I'm going to add to my cart has product. And this is a pretty simple one here. Has product, I pass in a product. and I'm simply going to say return, and I want this to be a Boolean value. So if I ended up just saying items product name, that would be truthy and falsy, and that's fine. That would actually work. It'll only show up when I end up having the product. But just if I wanted to really return a Boolean or false value, you could do not. So if something is falsy, it turns it to, if something is falsy, it's going to turn it to true, and not true is going to be false. If something is truthy, it'll turn it to false, and then the not will return it to true. So this is just a way that you can actually create something that's truthy or falsy into something that's true or false. And sometimes that can be kind of helpful. So this actually works out fine. Next thing that we're going to do is so we have the ability to interact with this cart, and our products is working fine, but we also wanted to display information about the cart. Maybe what we want to do is display the number of the subtotal for each item. So, if you ended up putting in, cleared this out, we'd want to show something on the bottom here. If we put in 2 of these, maybe we want to show foo with a value of 6, bar with a value of 5, and maybe a total for everything that you have in the cart. So we're going to do that by actually creating a cart controller that's also going to end up relying on this cart. So now let's actually set up this cart controller. So this is actually going to be down here. We'll put it right on this div, and we'll say ng controller. This is cart CTRL. Again, we get an exception here because it doesn't exist. So we could go over here, get that to go away by saying app.controller cart CTRL. We know that we're going to end up needing our scope, so we'll grab our scope. We know also we're going to need our cart, so we'll bring that in too. And so now for our cart control, we are actually going to need our items. So I am going to expose it here. I'll say items, right? So this is basically my object with all my items here. And I'll go over here and I'll say scope dot items is equal to cart dot items. And I'm going to loop over the items that are in my cart. Again, when I end up looping over them, so when you end up looping over an object, right, what we're going to end up getting is that we can end up getting our each of the items that are that's in our cart. So we go over here. We could say put an unordered list in here. We could do an ng repeat. And we'll say item or line item in items. Let's just see what the item looks like here. So once we start adding things in, so each of those items is going to be our product and our quantity, right? We're able to sort of we're able to loop over these, basically these objects. So the same way that you can iterate over an array, right? A repeater allows you to iterate over a hash. And so here, what we can actually do is be a little bit more descriptive. And we could specify actually what we want to do. Let's give this a class, proper class, list group item. And here we could say this is going to be item. And don't forget, this has a product, and the product has a name. So we should actually see that show up down here, right? Make it go away over here. We could also actually go in and put a sort of a subtotal for this line item, and just to kind of keep it simple for the moment, put this in parentheses. And what we'll do here is we'll specify this is going to be the item dot product dot price times the item dot quantity. Right, and this is just going to give us a number, but if we wanted to, we could format it as a currency. By using the currency filter. Okay, so again, as we add these in, we could see these numbers go up. Let's actually, I don't like the, I'm just going to put a dash here instead. Actually, maybe just a space, just so it doesn't look like it's a negative number. Okay, so that looks pretty good. Let's also assume that we want to put some sort of total that's on the bottom. So let's say that we wanted to have, we'll do it with another list item just to keep it simple. And we'll say list group item. And we'll specify that this is going to be total. So this value is going to be something that's going to be changing. And so as a result of that, I'm going to have a method called total. And what total is going to do, don't forget, this is going to be on my cart control. And when I ask for the total, I'm going to say what I want you to actually do is ask return the cart's total. So right now the cart doesn't have a total, so that's not going to work. But if I go over here and I look at my cart, if you sort of think about where things get tested out, there's going to be probably most of the testing would be on this card, or at least it would be a lot of testing on this card. And just to sort of get this to give me something, I'll say total, and I'll return 0, just to get that to show up. Let's actually put the word total next to it. And so what I want to do here is that in order to get the total, what I really need to do is I need to loop over the keys in my cart. So in order to do that, what I'm going to do here is that I'm going to return, and I'll say object keys, get me the keys to my items. And I'm going to reduce. So this is going to, when this ends up getting called, if you remember how the reduce works, I'm basically looping over my keys. That's why I'm going to call this key here. In fact, I'm going to loop over a sum and a key. And if you remember from reduce, there's a second parameter that you pass in, which is going to be your starting point. So we're going to start off at 0. And so once we end up going in here, in order to get our sum, we're going to end up saying sum plus equals. And so this is going to be items, key, product, price, times items, key, quantity. Right, so that's basically going to be the sum of the line item, and then I'm going to return the sum. And so this should start out at 0, and it should increase accordingly. Let's make it look a little bit nicer by giving it a currency format. And now this looks a little bit better. I could add these items, and I could remove them as well till I get down to 0. Let's do one other thing here, just to show that we could have a little reusability here, is let's put on the, actually put this on the top. So I'm going to put a, div over here with a class of well, and I'm going to call this, this is going to be a controller. And I'm going to call this cart summary control. The only thing that this is going to display for me is I'm going to say you have number of items in your cart. Okay, so this is totally not going to work at all now. But if I went over here and I created this controller, app, controller, cart, summary, control, and I went over here and I actually did this and put in scope. It said scope dot number of items. Again, you only put something on the scope if you want to expose it in the view. This is going to be a function. So let's say for now, I'll just return 0, right? You have 0 items in your cart. That's not really what I want to do. I'm actually going to have my cart. So again, I could bring my cart in here. It's going to, like I said, the key thing there is that it's a singleton. So if you did a console.log, this is really important. If you did a console.log here, you'd only see this come up once, even though I'm using the cart twice. Because again, the first time that you ask for the cart, this function ends up getting called, and whatever that function returns, that's what will end up getting passed in again. It's the same thing as when you end up using modules in Node. You'd get that same behavior if you did a console.log. So what I'm going to do here, when I want number of items, I'm going to say, hey, cart, you know how to compute your number of items. Cart, number of items. And so when I ask a cart for the number of items, it's going to be very similar to total. In fact, I'm just going to copy and paste. In this case, we'll change this to number of items. Again, we could still loop over the key. The only thing now is that the only thing we care about now is not the price. We only care about the quantity. You can see you have this real reusability by having this object here. So we have no items in the cart. Now we've got 1 item, 2, keep on going up, make this go down like this. So in the end, we've got this application. We've got 3 different controllers. We've got a factory that's keeping track of our cart, and we've got a factory that we didn't do all that much with, but that basically would be getting us our products. So this is a good example of how these things end up interacting with each other. Again, sort of the key takeaways here is just how the factories are these singleton objects that are created on demand. The first time that you ask for it, it ends up this function gets called, doesn't get called after that. But with controllers, they'll get called every time that you end up instantiating that controller. We're not using these controllers more than once, but we surely could if we wanted to. And that pretty much wraps this up, and I think we'll give you a pretty good basis for starting the workshop.